Hi, welcome again. My name is Ines.
And I'm Luisa.
And today we're going to talk a little bit more about trauma because we kind of mentioned that in the kind of post-marriage relationships and breakups, and then that can be quite traumatic, as we kind of spoke about. And trauma is a huge concept, really, and and people think about trauma like, oh, you need to have an earthquake or you need to have big events happening in your life, and in actual fact, traumatic is very personal, and it can be just a significant event that for you can be quite kind of a huge impact on your kind of well-being, and particularly I think the connection between the trauma and then our kind of our body. So the connection between the mind and the body is very much a hugely kind of researched area. As you go out there in kind of the articles. And I just want to talk today about Louisa Hay, and I'm not sure you can heal your life. She's fascinating, and she's 80, and she was one of the first that really made a connection between the mind and the body and the thinking around it. So her background is that she came from a very dysfunctional background. Lots of things happened in her life, and therefore, as we all know, she ended up in an orphanage. And mother and father couldn't cope. Father took off. Anyway, she ended up in an orphanage. Didn't have a lot of love and touch. And we all know that's also being kind of researched these days, that the touch in those early years is hugely important for our brain development.
Yes,
yeah, and so she came from that background, and was always felt lost in life. And then she met these women in the church who were talking about positive thoughts and affirmation and gratitude, and that's how she started her journey. And she talks a lot about positivity. And it doesn't mean just saying positive, think, oh, I'm good enough. That's not that's just too simple in that sense, because we're all doing that. But it's actually kind of saying it and then the actions after that. So, for example, one of the stories, she writes all these stories about people. So one of the stories is that somebody's very kind of depressed, and then this person's working with that depressed person and saying, is there anything you could do for somebody in your world? Is there anything? And then he was thinking, and then he said, well, maybe I could help the lady downstairs because she's very old and it's a bit of rubbish around her flat. Maybe I could clean it up. No, that's a good thing. So anyway, and he said, text me or phone me when you're doing that or want to do that. And so he did. He said, yeah, I'm going to clean right now. And he cleaned it up and went back, and he said, I feel really, I've done something for somebody else. Yeah. So even though the person was still feeling, of course, not really happy, however, the fact that he did something for the other person made him feel better in it kind of like, hey, I can actually step outside my negative kind of frame of worldview and actually do something for somebody else. So there's a whole kind of thinking, positive thinking and actions that is described by Louise Hay. And she did a lot of work when AIDS just came out in the 70s and 80s, and she started working with men and AIDS, and they felt guilty, stigma, negative thinking, and she kind of worked with them, say, I don't want to hear any negativity, I want to hear acceptance, you're a good person, and we're going to focus on the positivity around that. And therefore these men who had not slept for weeks started sleeping again, and she started with 15 people in a group, 50 men, and ended up with 8,000 in hold. It's amazing. So I think with trauma, thinking about trauma, which is a very personal experience, for anybody's different, is the acceptance that it's the way it feels for you, and the connection between your thinking around it and your physical experience, and therefore therefore you can feel constantly anxious because the nerves are going through your body, and that just around your thinking as well, and what you can do about that.
And also, stress and anxiety impacts on your physical body, and the wear and tear that happens from ongoing exposure to stress, ongoing anxiety. So there is a connection between our stress, our anxiety and trauma to our physical well-being. And so, we can explore that a little bit more in the Health Recovery Hub, which is, how some of our emotional and traumatic experiences actually manifest in sicknesses.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes. There's a whole movement now that actually looks, you've got now health psychologists and specialists who work in hospitals saying, you've got this chronic tummy ache. Let's look at it from a total different angle, and let's look about how you cope with stress, or how tell me your story, tell me your life story, and that's kind of, and then working on that, and then seeing the impact on your symptoms. So it's a different way of looking at your kind of physical experiences, and not seeing it from one angle, but very much holistic, and the story that kind of you bring with it, and it could be traumatic. Most of the time it is traumatic. Actually.
And I just want to, suggest a strategy, because if you go into the Trauma Hub, you'll see my own trauma recovery story. And so for me as a child, a lot of my trauma was locked in my body memory. So, absolute terror and paralysis. So I would actually be paralyzed with fear and be afraid to move, and be for hours. So, pouring with sweat and paralyzed. And actually that memory has been quite difficult to unlock from my body. There are actually times when I actually, if I feel like I'm doing something against my will, my physical body is almost locked in that memory. It's very hard for me to actually move, actually get up and get out of bed and move. So, one of the strategies I really encourage, because I find that movement, and with children, there's all kinds of therapies out there, but things, dance and movement can actually be therapeutic. For me, I find that if I'm not engaged in physical activity, that is actually not good for me, because it's very easy for me to then find it hard to actually shift myself, because my mentally, so I have to actually be walking and doing consistent exercise it actually unlocks my mindset. It's so interconnected, and I find that I move more freely, not just physically, but actually mentally, and being able to shift into other things goals or things that I want to do that I might feel blocked by or find challenging. So this is a big area, and we'll be exploring it in greater depth in future series.
And it's also around, I'm just thinking, of connecting with our breathing. And the impact it has on our kind of anxiety or panicky feelings. So we'll discuss it also more in the kind of mind and soul hub around that, and the touch. And I think if you're looking at the way this kind of era we are dealing with kind of illness is more from a wellness perspective, is really looking in the kind of mind, body and soul connections, really, and not so much only on that physical medication or the kind of illness symptoms, but actually looking at the narratives and of the people that bring the symptoms with them. So that's kind of a powerful story as well, because we need to rewire.
That's it.
That's what you're saying. You need to rewire yourself to be able to kind of release that tension and the kind of not being able to move. It's a rewire scenario. And with touch and all your senses, that's why sensory profiling is a huge thing in psychiatry. Sensory profiling is very important. What works for you with your senses to release that. So that's another thing that we can discuss.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be talking about this in the future.